Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Go cut on somebody and do good.
I just have one more tip for you guys.
Okay.
The mega pack.
Yep.
Definitely, for a lot of people, when you guys get the mega pack, I put them into my file, and I didn't look at them until I got stuck. But peruse through those. Seriously, there's a lot of templates that Mr. Peña is going to send out to you that's embedded within the mega pack. There's audio. Like, a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't remember what was said in the seminar about raising capital, and there's like a full audio on like raising capital. Listening to it, taking notes from it, allows me to say, hey, you know what, this is what we need to do, and it gives you the dialogue on how to talk to banks, and it gives you a good refresher. So don't forget that. And good luck.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Hard to believe it's the same guy. Anyway, when I met him at the Ritz, he came. And he had to hold his chin like this. His hand shook so much, and his bottom chin shook like this. And I said, how can you operate that way, Doc? He says, well, I'm not nervous when I'm operating. And he says, is it that noticeable? I said, what, am I blind? I mean, what the hell? And that's... Now, you would see, you would never have said that to him when you first met. Never. Your collar's up. Yeah. But he, it speaks for itself. I mean, he thinks it's easy, and he's just rocking and rolling. I mean, he didn't say how he had trouble getting an anesthesiologist for Saturday and Sunday. He didn't talk about fucking nurses don't want to work, surgical nurses. He didn't get through all that shit. I said, well, get rid of them. He says, okay, we do. Because normally surgery's not, procedure surgery, and he does heavy surgery, isn't on Saturday and Sundays. Unless it's an emergency hospital, you got to cut your leg off or something like that. So, and his partners, his medical partners, I mean, he didn't talk about how they had a fucking stroke and they're worried, and because he's the energy of the partnership, as you can, and you're going to leave us and leave us. I said, no, tell the guys they can be in the deal, and we'll give them some equity so they don't think we're going to abandon them. Which he brought one of them in, one of them didn't want to be in, so one of them.
Speaking of that, I was wondering, just came to mind, when before the deal is sealed and you're gathering your members, creating your board, is there any type of document, legal structure that holds that board together that says, if Alfred brings
we don't formalize that stuff until we have. He had a board meeting, but normally my recommendation is don't have a board meeting until you're going to do a deal, and then you have the company, the lawyers formalize. Is it an LLC? Is it this? The one thing he forgot to mention, or he didn't mention, we're being formed in Ireland. We're going to do an inversion because the accountants and lawyers think it's going to be so fucking big, we only want to pay minimum taxes. So we're going to do just like the big boys. He forgot that part, which I didn't even think of really. It's rarely that any of these cocksuckers think of something I don't, but they did. Because inversions are more expensive. And they're willing to do all that. I say, Doc says, what should I just, fine, inversion, here we come. And that's what the government and everybody's complaining about because they don't pay any taxes, which is, so they think it's going to be a big deal. And so we have that board meeting, we incorporate or whatever we're going to do, LLC, whatever the format, the structure. The lawyers and accountants have already worked on it before that, so they know. And so we do the paperwork, and all at the same time in the closing. And one of the guys on the board, funny enough, who's an industry expert, he's a PhD London School of Economics, but he's an American, and he's on one of my other boards. And when Joe called him, he's retired in Palm Springs, and he says and he said, who's on your board? Blah, blah, blah. Mr. Peña suggested that you call me, and I didn't. And he says, no, he didn't. And he laughed. He said, so he went to Palm Springs, he met with him. He said, fine, they had lunch, and he came on the board. So that guy is, he's on another one of my boards. But I mean, he has eight guys, which is a little heavy, but I mean, it's not so heavy, really. But but he's a hardworking kid. I mean, there's no fucking doubt about it. I mean, how old does he look to you? He's 44. He's 44. He's 40. And he said he's a 6-pack, 2% body fat, and he says none of that shit helped me. None of it. He says, but he's not in any of that anymore. He's back to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Fucking pork chops. He says, no stamina. Whoever said that you get stamina, you can't work 90, 100 hours being like that. He says, that's horse shit. All those guys, it's just horse shit. So he says that paleo shit, I mean, they must have been eating something else back in them cave days. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's a good guy.
He's definitely feeling the passion.
Oh, yeah. I mean, guys, but success begets success. It's a same old story. And he says, like Mr. Peña says, but he listened. He listened. But you can deviate a little, but I would rather you not deviate so much in the beginning till you get something fucking accomplished. Then, I mean, he's deviated, and one of his deals that fell out of bed is now back in bed. I mean, and normally I don't recommend you doing 4 or 5 deals at once. Now, what are the chances of these guys, each one of them doing 4 or 5 deals at once? And now that you've heard them talk a little bit.
They need to be very disciplined.
Yeah, well, that eliminates almost all of you. So, I mean, I will not recommend that. One at a time. Yeah, correct. One at a time. And you'll get a fourth perspective from Matt tomorrow. And again, I spread them across the board because I wanted, hopefully you'll resonate with one of them. And they're all different, and from super educated to no education, and from professional investment banker with 4, 5, 6 degrees to surgeon. I mean, so I mean, it is. I could have had 5 more examples of because the myth is the money's not hard. The money's not hard. And I'm embarrassed that I didn't think of the inversion angle, actually. I mean, but just like I've never done crowdfunding, and by the way, the best book, although I scanned this, the best book on crowdfunding, I've never done a crowdfunding deal. Because I've never had it, because I always get them. But this is the best book on crowdfunding. And the guys that have read it say, Dan, it's QLA with tech shit. I mean, basically these guys. And they've done more crowdfunding deals than anybody else. And I've never done an inversion deal. I've never set up in Ireland, although I have businesses in Ireland, but we were there to begin with. We didn't take a U.S. deal and bring it to Ireland like the accountants and the lawyers are doing for us on this deal. And you don't do an inversion deal unless there's going to be a lot of money involved. So no better thought process. If the lawyers and the accountants think there's going to be a lot of fucking money involved, we better set up over there. And then when he says litigation is a business tool, the lady partner had an orgasm. Oh, fuck. I mean, this is a client from heaven. Allah sent me these guys. And it's not a lot because I do believe litigation is a business tool, as I've already said ad nauseum. Any other questions about Joe? Yeah.
Mine wasn't specifically about Joe, but he was talking about getting a CEO on board.
Well, he's got a guy that's going to be the CEO.
My point was, what happens if you don't get a CEO?
Well, I mean, the bankers, the lawyers, and so everybody so far figure they haven't asked him or anything, and Joe hasn't said, I don't believe I can be a CEO. Think that he can be a CEO till we find one. Normally, in a deal like this, the first acquisition, you look to the guy there to be the CEO, if not permanently on an interim basis, whoever's the CEO of that deal. But like he says, I'm a shitty administrator. And virtually almost everybody is a shitty administrator. And that's why I like big margins, guys. Big margins. Because it's tough when it's a skinny margin business. Believe me, it's hard because you have no wiggle room. I mean, the decisions you make can, virtually, not every, this is exaggeration, but every decision you make can be a below the waterline hit. Because when you're only operating 3, 4, 5, 6 margin, that money disappears like that. When you got 40%, the reason I liked mobile home parks in America, the industry average was 67% profit margin, gross. 67. If you had a good, well-run, 90%. Shit, a monkey lawyer can operate at 40 or 50% margin. And when they first brought me, I said, fuck, this is Allah. I mean, it was terrific. And the caravan business in this country is not dissimilar. And the caravan business in Denmark is not dissimilar. I've just found out because I got a guy doing it there. But it's the management. I mean, mobile home parks and caravans, I mean, the guy, like, no teeth, the manager's got to wear a gun on his hip to collect the rents, got an eye patch. And normally what you hire is retired Army, Marines, first sergeants. Those are your general managers that don't have such empathy or sympathy for the tenants. And I've been there, done that. And how hard do you want me to enforce these rules and regulations? I mean, I want the money. Does that answer your question, First Sergeant? No problem, sir. Consider it done. Consider it done. And then he got run over. Some drug dealers that were living there, unbeknownst, ran him over, the First Sergeant. He gets out of the hospital 4.5 months later. He goes back and shoots 3 of them. And then he gets in trouble, of course. Of course, he is, and you don't say, you got any last words? He just went and shot him. Then fuck, cocksuckers ran me over. But in the mobile park place, it was fun. It was some fun. We had some fun. And we had this lake. And the accountants and the lawyers and the environmental people screwed up. And the environmental papers you get to make sure you're not on a waste dump or some bullshit, they made a mistake. And we were on a toxic waste dump by 50 feet. The lake that we had down there was having catfish with 2 heads. Okay? And the snowbird Canadians were coming down. 80% of the place was snowbirds, they call them Canadians, for the winter, excuse me. And when we had a big meeting of all the owners, we told them, the Canadians said, so what? And they still came with their grandchildren in the fucking lake. They didn't care. And, it was unbelievable. I think it was a 1,000-space mobile home park. 1,000 space. Canadians pay on time, generally speaking. They were good tenants. The Canadians paid on time. So, anything else? Any other questions? Oh, yes.
So if he already has money and all that, why isn't he doing this full time?
Because he's got his partners. The other, he can't leave them in a lurch. He won't. He doesn't want to leave. And I don't blame him. I told him, see our YouTube.